Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Impactful Teamwork. And this week, I am joined by a guest. And today, I have Brian Vogel with me. And Brian is the founder of Sundog Coaching and the co founder of Sensible HR. So, Brian, welcome to Impactful Teamwork. Super excited to have you here today. And thanks for joining us.
Julie, I'm so excited to talk to you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, that's great. So, Brian, why don't you just introduce yourself to people, tell them a little bit about your background, how you got into coaching as well, because that was a fascinating story you were just sharing with me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brian Vogel, I'm here in Austin, Texas, in the US, and basically a career HR guy for 25 years, working both in large enterprise settings as well as small, medium-sized, startup companies running the HR show per se. Stood up Sensible HR in 2021 with a co-founder coming out of COVID. I had left Indeed just before the pandemic, and yeah, good timing.
Good
And
timing, yeah.
basically a fractional HR boutique advisory firm. My founder went back in-house in January 2024, and I found myself being a solopreneur with Sensible HR. And things had shifted and was having to do more business development than I had before when we first stood up the organization. Hired a coach to primarily help me with business development, but like any good coach, he started to ask some pretty good questions and asked me one day, what did I really like about human resources? And I started to dance a bit and said it was very broad filled and I don't really necessarily care for safety, and payroll finance can have that every day and twice on Sunday. And he's, yeah, you're not answering the question. And I'm like, that's really why I got into the field to begin with. And that was to do coaching. I felt like it was the business discipline I could coach the most in. And he challenged me, why aren't you just doing that? And I said, 25 years in HR, I'm not going to cut off the hand that feeds me. And he encouraged me to stand up another brand, which is Sundog Coaching, and stood that up at the beginning of this year, focusing on leadership coaching, incorporating mental fitness as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I love that. There's two things I love about that. The first is that actually really getting clear. It's easy how we can get diverted from our passions, right? Because we can get skilled
Exactly.
in lots of different areas. And I know from my own corporate career, when I think about what I did in corporate and what I'm doing now, sometimes they seem worlds apart, but actually I can see the synergies of how they got there and how it makes sense. Love that you've really reconnected with your passion there. I know that you were sharing before that some of your passion came from being a swim coach. So that's where your coaching career started, I'm guessing. So tell me about some of your experiences as a swim coach. What made coaching a great experience for you as a swim coach?
Yeah, I think it's not only the coaching, it's also growing up a competitive swimmer. I swam
Mm.
collegiately. In between summers in my college days, I coached a summer team in where I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and then ended up coaching as a side hustle or moonlighted as a coach when I was in my 20s while I worked in, I really started out actually out in marketing, and then I moved over to human resources when I went back and got my graduate degree. But for me, coaching, especially coaching swimming, you could immediately see how you were doing and what impact you were having on the athletes in the water. And it was a very objective measurement. All you had to do was look at the pace clock and you could see they were getting
Yeah.
faster. So for me, I felt as though seeing that and knowing what impact I could have and being on a team and seeing how much a difference would mean to coach those swimmers in the right way and the impact, not only in the training, but from a soft skill perspective, what would uplift the team and have them go faster. And I felt like that was very applicable to a manager in a setting where if they want to elevate their team, they have to elevate their own coaching of that team. So that's really what drew me to coaching and drew me to HR at the onset.
Yeah, and I think you make such an important point there because I think as leaders, all of us nowadays have become coaches, not
Absolutely.
qualified coaches. We're all having to coach our team through some pretty turbulent times, right, around us. And therefore,
Mhm.
having those coaching skills is so important for any single leader to have. So, what would be your best piece of advice to a business leader listening to us today? What's the best way they can develop their coaching skills or the best piece of advice that you would give them as to how to adopt a coaching style in the workplace?
Yeah, I think all managers are coaches and it should be coaches. You sometimes wish that the word manager would be lost and we just call people that oversee people coaches versus managers. I feel like sometimes like you're not managing anyone, you're coaching somebody. But the advice I often give leaders is you have really your primary role as a leader and with a team is to affirm and adjust behaviors. And
Mm,
those behaviors are what drive result. And if you really peel the onion all the way back, Julia, the results are nothing more than aggregated behaviors. What I often come across with leaders, tell me what results really are. And they'll say ROI, EBITDA, the profit margin. I'm like, no, those are just measurements of results. What are the results really? And the results are really nothing more than aggregated behaviors. And as a coach, even if it's just your microcosm of a team as a coach, your job day in and day out is to affirm and adjust behaviors to get the best results you can for your team and for your organization.
wow, I love that phrase. Affirm and adjust the behaviors of your team members. And it is so true. I loved how succinctly you put that. Yeah, because as leaders, that is exactly what we're doing. I often talk about it as being a bit more, like being the conductor of the orchestra. And it's in here, violin, and that's how we need to look at it. And when we put that then through the lens of behaviors, what behaviors do we need from people and what behaviors do we need when from them? That's super, super powerful. And I think perhaps some of the challenges for leaders is that they haven't realized that, and B, then they don't know how they can affirm and adjust the behaviors. So can you share some tools and strategies and techniques people could use to how would you as a leader start adjusting the behavior, say, of a team member who's maybe underperforming or in whatever scenario works best for you?
Yeah, I think when I'm working with leaders, one of the questions is they do the intake is tell me more about your one-on-ones. And they'll start sharing with me their one-on-ones. And
Mm,
I'm like, that sounds like a project status update meeting. It doesn't sound like a one-on-one. And I'm of the belief that the most powerful manager tool ever is the one-on-one, right? Because in most feedback, almost all feedback occurs in a one-on-one. And in that one-on-one, most feedback is delivered by coaching. So it's what I call the manager trinity, which is one-on-ones, coaching, and feedback. But what often the mistake that's made is they turn it into their meeting, the manager or the leader or
mhm.
coach, and they don't realize it's really their teammates or their employees meeting. So that one-on-one is theirs, not yours. And in that one-on-one, if you want to adjust and affirm those behaviors, I say a half hour is the sweet spot, and it's 10 minutes for them, 10 minutes for you, and 10 minutes for their development. And the first 10 minutes that drops off is the 10 minutes for you. So you always want to work in their time frame. And if they run longer, yes, and then their development. And I think if you do that right as a leader or a coach, then they'll know that you care about not only their career, but them as a person. And I'm not talking about getting into their personal business, but if you want people to go above and beyond for you, they have to know you care for them as a human, in my view.
No, and I so agree with that. And I love that the one-on-one, that trifecta of the one-on-one, the coaching and the feedback. And isn't it?
Right.
It's and unfortunately, in the busy world that we're living in today, what I do see often happen is that one-on-one is the thing that keeps getting missed, right? Because, oh, we've got some project deadline to get out. And actually having the discipline to actually realize as a manager, as a leader, that this is a key
Mhm.
part of your role. And actually by doing this one-on-one, although it might feel that's a waste of time in inverted commas, you're actually going to get
Right.
better results because you're going to put the business back on track. But so many leaders that I talk to are like, oh, yeah, I'm so busy, we missed it. Or they didn't even get their one on one with their line manager for exactly the same reason. So,
Yeah. It should be the last thing that comes off the
yeah,
calendar. And too often it's the first thing that comes off the calendar.
yeah. Okay. I love that. And so I'm just curious then, what would you think is the best piece of advice that you could give let's call them an up and coming leader in an organization, about how can they motivate and inspire their team members?
Yeah, I think the first is to give them more. I think oftentimes leaders hold on to things too much. They believe it's easier for them to do it themselves than to give it to somebody on their team. And in some cases, Julia, that may be the case, but no one's going to grow if you don't challenge them and give them more responsibility. And I guess the advice would be to let go and let go of what you think you can do, or let go of what you think you should hold on to just because it's easier, and focus on what can you give to and delegate to have your team grow.
Yeah. And I don't know, you've alluded to it there. It's something I see quite often, is that leaders feel comfortable sometimes being in the weeds and doing the stuff, right? Because that's where they came
Right.
from, most of them. We've promoted so many leaders up, but we haven't given them the skills. So the safe place for them to go back to their comfort zone is back to, oh, I used to do this job, so I'll keep doing this part of the job. Overwhelm themselves because now they're still just trying to do part of their own job and their new job. And in the same time, limiting the opportunities for development of their team members who might be more than willing to take on that task.
Exactly. I think they lose sight because, and they're focused on the short term, or what's in front of them and what fire they need to put out. And what they fail to understand, that they need to look at the long run, or look at the entire runway. And to get that plane, to continue that analogy, get that plane to take off, you have to fuel that plane so it can get to the end of the runway and take off. And to fuel that plane, being the employee, you have to grow and develop them and give them fuel, which means stretch them and challenge them so they can grow. Nobody wants to be bored, right? That's the worst in a job, is to be bored. Bad bosses, people leave companies and then being bored, which could translate to, okay, that's a bad boss if their employee is bored because they're not giving them or stretching them or giving them opportunities. That's the worst.
And I think as well, related to that is often, and I was guilty about doing this, so I'll own it.
Right.
Good coach, I'll own it. Um,
Yeah.
that I remember there were like some tasks that I had when I was running my division in corporate that I hated doing. So I thought my team members would hate doing them, right? So I was like, oh, I'm never going to give
Right.
that to Jane because it was just such a horrible job. Not realizing at that time that Jane actually loved that thing to do. And actually, I was depriving her and not utilizing all the best potential in my team members because I was like, oh, it's so horrible. I'm not going to give it to them. But actually, it was their zone of genius.
Yeah. And it's interesting until you bring that up. So in my coaching practice, I use a couple instruments, as we all do, to build self-awareness for the leader. And one of the tools I use is something called the 6 Types of Working Genius, which is an assessment tool by Patrick Lencioni, where it identifies there's 6 geniuses, and it identifies which geniuses are your geniuses, which bring you joy and energy, and which are competencies, and then which are frustrations. And what folks that take it, they're like, wait a minute, my frustrations are what I'm really good at. It's not a rating, it's a ranking. And
Mhm.
just because you've done this for 20 years and you're really good at it, doesn't mean it brings you joy and energy. So it's a real game changer when it comes to productivity. It's certainly a individual instrument, but power is in changing productivity and creating those aha moments for a team.
Yeah, and you remind me, I listened to that book, Patrick's book, on Audible, probably like last year, and I'd completely forgotten about that he'd done that team diagnostic. So thank you for reminding me about that.
And it's in the assessment arena, it's fairly new. It's only been around for 4 years,
Yeah.
and it's incredibly simplistic. It's not nearly as complicated or have the psychometric, I guess, philosophy, or trying to find the right word, but it's not like taking the disc or taking
Yep.
Myers-Briggs. The way I often describe it to clients, because they often sometimes bring up Clifton strengths
Yep.
or strengths factors. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great tool. I'm not saying this is different. This is better than that. It's different because that's a noun, and what the 6 Types of Working Genius goes to is what I've called the verb.
And I love that actually. What it highlights is sometimes there's things that we do in our job that we've become good at, in inverted commas, but actually that, like you say, they don't bring us any joy. We've just almost been doing them for the sake of it. It's part of our job. We've got to do it. I'm not saying that if you hate part of your job, I'm not giving you a pass here, people, to not do it and say to your boss, "Oh, I'm no good at that. I'm not doing it." That's not quite how it works.
Right.
But actually recognizing and helping your boss recognize, if you're a team member, that, yeah, while you can do, in my case, it would be my accounts. Can I do my accounts? Yeah. Do I love to do them? No.
But and Pat describes every job as a 6-type job. It's just some jobs are more focused on wonder and invention, which are two of the geniuses, and others are not. And if wonder and invention are your working geniuses, you want to go find that job that's more concentrated in wonder and invention. I think he also says, which I think is very interesting, I've bought into, is most burnout, which you've heard a lot about, but it's not really caused by working too many hours in most cases. It's by working too many hours in your working frustrations.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the things and that makes so much sense, because the things that you love to do energize you, and the things that you don't love to do,
Correct.
they sap your energy
Yep.
out.
Exactly.
Yeah. It makes sense that burnout comes when you're doing all these things that just drain your energy and don't give you that
Right.
level of productivity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you were faced with a team member who's in that affecting burnout, what are some of the, again, strategies that you've coached people around to help them get back into that zone of genius? What are some of the things that you've been doing there?
Yeah. I use the 6 types of working genius. Another tool that I've used to build awareness in. The first step is, okay, what's getting in your way or what needs to change for you as a leader? And the other instrument I've been using is something called the Saboteur assessment, which comes out of a book called Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Shamin. And it's very powerful because what it does is we all have that voice in our head, as Julia, and that voice can either be negative or positive. When it's negative, the saboteurs are in control of that voice in your head. When it's positive, you're on the sage side, is what he describes it as. But just understanding and being able to catch those saboteurs and use what he calls a PQ rep, which is PQ's positive quotient, and move over to the sage side of your brain. It's so powerful. And it also, from a coaching standpoint, the way it's described is if you're working with a leader and they have yet to understand how to control their mind and the voices in their head, then, it's like building castles on sand. So you first want to get folks in a position where they can practice mental fitness and control that voice in their head and move it over to the positive side or into sage versus out of the fear-based saboteur brain. It's not something that it's a practice, and all of us go back and forth. But the true North Star is this: you can't lead yourself or lead others until you can control that voice in your head.
Yeah. And I love that terminology, saboteur and sage. How beautiful is that? I love that. I love alliteration
Yeah.
too.
It's been along with that, and there are some folks working geniuses and recognizing what that is can be a real game changer in terms of how they approach their roles and really also how they understand what frustrates them and what gives them energy and joy.
Yeah. And for listeners, I'll just signpost you to a podcast that was probably done a couple of months ago now, or that was all about beliefs and how beliefs really, if we're not careful, can run the show. And like you just said, Brian, there, actually, we've got to make sure we've got positive beliefs, because whatever we admit as the leader, that energy ripples out to everyone in our team. And either we're sending out that positive quotient energy, we're sending out that chaotic, manic, scattered energy, and everyone gets confused. And there's a whole load of conflict then that arises out of that.
For sure. Yeah. It's a practice, right? Just like we try to get to the gym and practice physical fitness, you have to practice mental fitness as well.
And so I appreciate you've got to practice mental fitness, but if I was starting from scratch, what would be the first thing I would do to start practicing mental fitness? Because I've got all these saboteurs out there that you're not great, you can't do it, you're not good enough. I call him Chatterbox Charlie. He sits on my shoulder and he can be quite noisy quite a lot of the time. So, what would be a couple of tips that we could give to the listeners about how do you start getting and putting in place a mental fitness regime as you do your physical fitness regime?
Yeah, and I think you could say mental fitness, and it's similar to mindfulness. It's a little bit different. Calm is a popular app, and
Mm,
that's really just to calm your mind. This is about a little bit more than that.
mm,
It can be very relaxing, but it's more about catching those saboteurs and then converting that to the other side of the brain, which is not fear based and what the practice called sage. But to get to your question, Joey, the first step would be what I would recommend is let's just understand that you have those voices and those negative voices in your head. And everyone can go out and take the free saboteur assessment. Takes about 10 minutes and then you get your results. And that's the first step I would tell folks to make in terms of their mental fitness journey. And then once you've taken that saboteur assessment, then find a PQ coach like myself and have them run you through a saboteur discovery session, which can be very eye-opening. Folks that can do that with me by just asking for me to send an assessment so they don't have to find it. Just send an email to hello@sundogcoaching.com and say, can you please send me the free saboteur assessment?
okay, fabulous. And everyone will put Brian's email there, hello@sundogcoaching.com in the show notes so that you've got that. And that's an amazing gift. So thank you, Brian, for offering that. I'm just thinking,
You're very
well,
welcome.
I need to be thinking about
When
that.
folks complete that, then I reach out to them and we'll do it's a 30 to 45-minute saboteur discovery session.
Wow. Yeah. Because I think we do forget, we tend to often think about managers and leaders, and we always think about the like technical skills that they need to do their jobs. And we forget about all these soft skills and particularly the mindset of how important that is for leaders. And I've often said success as a leader is 80% mindset, 20% skills. We've got to have the right soft skills
Absolutely.
and we've got to have the right mental wiring or get to that point. We're not all born with it immediately in order to be successful because we can't lead others until we can lead ourselves.
Yeah. And visually, the first step is just being aware and having self awareness to what are, you brought it up before, what are those self limiting beliefs? And how do you combat that? And how do you get to a practice that changes those negative triggers day in and day out?
And a lot of that, of course, as we know, is also impacted by the environment. We don't really talk about that a lot in business, about how important the environment is. Your
Yeah,
boss impacts that, your company culture, all of these things actually can help or support you on that journey as well, right?
it does. Yeah. And I think I use the term team effectiveness quite a bit. And I think if you want your team to go above and beyond for you and for your organization, first and foremost, we talked about this. The team needs to know that you're invested in them and you want to see them grow and develop. Second, they want to understand that you care for them as a human. I'm not saying don't dive into the personal business. That's not what I'm talking about. But you don't just see them as an employee. When I work with leaders, I ask, how well do you know your team? And I'm like, oh yeah, I know them really well. And I'm like, okay, so what's Susie's husband's name? And I'll get a blank stare. And I'm like, how do you think Susie thinks that you care about her if you don't even know her spouse's or her partner's name? And now I'll go as far as what are the children's name? Do they have children? And that's what just having a interest and having the human centric focus of you're working with humans and not business. And those are your employees, but they're humans first and foremost. And getting to know them as a human without prying into their personal business. I think that's key to elevate an organization and continue to raise that bar. You have to elevate the teams that are creating those results. And the only way to elevate the teams that are creating the results is to elevate your own game as a coach or a leader or a manager.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I love that. It's like you set the tone for everything going on around you. And I
Right.
think we often talk here on the podcast about this ripple impact. And I think so many leaders
Yeah.
don't understand. We're either creating this positive ripple, your PQ, or we're creating this negative
Yeah.
ripple. And
Right.
it impacts whether our team members go home in a great mood and now they go home and they're really happy and now they're nice to their spouse and they're nice to their kids and happy days. We've got this positive ripple out, or they go home, everyone's had a really rubbish day and now I scream at the kids and we get this
Yeah.
downward spiral going on. And so it's a lot of responsibility being a leader in a business
It
and
is.
looking after
Yes.
team members. And I think a lot of us have really forgotten that, how holistic that role is and how important it is to the overall success of the business and people's well-being as well.
Yeah. And being a manager or coach and having a team, that may be the path you have to follow or the ladder you have to climb to progress in an organization, but it's not for everybody. And it's okay if you don't want to lead that team. I think what's putting my HR hat on for a second is you have to have rungs on that ladder to climb that are outside a coach or managerial role to advance in the organization. Maybe a fellow within a company is equivalent to a senior director, but that fellow is the individual contributor job. I think there's oftentimes we plot folks into managerial roles. One, they don't have the skill set.
Yep.
And two, that's not what brings them joy and energy, right?
No, you've touched on one of my massive bugbears within organizations, and exactly this. The technical specialist, the only way they can get
Right.
promoted in a hierarchical structure is by then leading people. And that's not their zone of genius. And that's not what they love to do. And it's frustrated me for many years about why we can't have, if we've got two ladders, you've got your technical specialists and they're great and we need those.
Right.
And we've also got the people that lead. And we've all seen it. We've all worked for people who, for example, were the best salesman. They made loads and loads of sales incredible. They got promoted to sales director. They hate it. They're rubbish at doing all the admin because that's not their zone of genius. And then they end up leaving the business but they couldn't get promoted to the next level because there wasn't a level unless they managed people. So it's a personal, massive bugbear of mine.
Right. Yeah. And I'm right there with you, Julia. It's one of my pet peeves is don't put folks into leadership or managerial positions that don't want to lead and grow their people. It doesn't make them bad people. Again, like you said, it's their zone of genius. If you give up the sales example, which is a great example. I saw it at Indeed when I was at Indeed for 4 years that we would
Yep.
take engineering leaders or engineering great individual contributors and plot them into engineering manager roles. And they would become miserable. Their teams would become miserable because they were no longer doing what brought them joy and energy, to use that term again. And it was a downward spiral
Yeah. Yeah. It
for them
happens.
and their team. You talk
Yeah.
about a ripple effect
Yeah. And
for sure.
yeah. Yeah. So it's so frustrating. But at the same time, that great engineer that you had there, the system should enable him to be able to continue to accelerate his growth and accelerate his pay expectations, even though he doesn't want to lead people. And I think that's where my discourse comes with all of this, because then what we're
For
saying,
sure.
if people don't want to lead, that's fine. But then we shouldn't have to cap their salaries because the system doesn't allow it. But get me on my
Right.
soapbox about that. And how that doesn't work in teams. Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much. Brian, so are there any final nuggets of wisdom you'd like to leave us with before we close this down today? Because it's been really interesting talking to you and getting all your perspectives on this.
Yeah. I often use with my clients an acronym, and there's a coach here in the United States football coach. His name was Lou Boltz, and I had the opportunity to see him speak a couple times when I was in college here. He was actually the college football coach and very successful. And at one point, someone asked him, like, what does it mean to win to you? And he goes, that's easy. Win's an acronym. It's just about doing what's important now.
Oh, I love that. I love a good acronym at the best of time. Here, I'm writing it down. What's important now? Win.
And just doing that,
Wow.
I think what he was striving to is it's it's not the big wins come from incremental wins.
Yeah.
So what can be your win today? And what your win is today is focusing on what's important now. And oftentimes I find that leaders get caught in this cycle where they're not going after what I call the big rocks and they continue to go after the small rocks.
Yep.
And it's often those big rocks that demand your attention and demand your attention not only for the organization, but for your team. And those are what's important there.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And if we all focused on a win all the time, what's important now, how everything, like you say, would incrementally grow and expand anyway. And we get to those
Exactly.
big results if we were just focused on that. And I love that mindset as a great philosophy for us to close with. Brian, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you very much for offering people to take the sabotage assessment so they can take the
Yeah.
assessment, they can find out the saboteur. And we'll put your email address there in the show notes for them.
A great conversation. Thank you, Julia.
Oh, no, you are so welcome. So, everyone, I think I just leave you with this parting thought. What is your win for this week? What's important now? Take that away. And I'd love to hear next week what people's wins are for this week. Okay. So, until next week, bye bye from myself and Brian. Bye, folks.